The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Ask a Rabbi from Congregation Eitz Chayim in Port St. Lucie. Please give us a call at 772-340-1590 if there's any question you'd like to ask a rabbi. So last week we ended up discussing, having a discussion about the New York new abortion law, and I promised that I would take a look and see what I could learn about it, because when the question came up, I knew absolutely nothing.
I think maybe the caller was more commenting on the Virginia governor too.
Okay, well, I didn't look at that one because the New York abortion law was out. And as is usually the case when you're looking at anything political, or the mix of politics and religion, always an interesting firestorm potential in the pot, as they say. And so I was trying to find something a little bit balanced. And the article that I found most interesting was actually out of America magazine, which is a pro-life magazine. And they were reviewing it. And right, and this is from Sam Sawyer, and the article is dated January 30th, and it's in their explainer section, says what New York's new abortion law does and doesn't do. And there's a couple of really key points that they make. The article, in my very large print, which, as you chuckle, is probably 16 or 18 point. So it reads pretty quick. I'm not going to read the whole thing, unless somebody has a question, which I'll refer to it. Basically what they say, so there's a couple of key points. Okay. So they say that, as with any charged or derisive issue, the choice of emphasis and focus and coverage can give the same facts different interpretations and implications, and that's why I wasn't willing to say anything about anything that I didn't know something about. And it is likely that I will be accused of doing the same in the article. Both I and America magazine are strongly pro-life and not on the sidelines of this argument. Okay, so much of the disagreement and confusion around what the law does is the result of which abortion cases advocates choose to focus on. Pro-life advocates argue that the law potentially allows the most extreme forms of abortion without any serious restriction, and they are right. Pro-choice advocates respond that the late-term abortions up to the point of birth that pro-lifers highlight are extremely rare and almost always involve cases of extreme medical complexity, and they are right. So he points out a couple of things. First, the major aim of the law was to change the terms of the debate. Basically, he says the primary reason for passage was to stake out New York's position in favor both of preserving and expanding Roe v. Wade's guarantee of access to abortion. Okay, and so it does a couple of things. Second, New York already has one of the highest rates of abortion in the country. In New York City, about 1 in every 3 pregnancies ends in abortion. And he goes on to say that, there's some serious issues there that we'll take a very systemic look to try to address. Okay, so then he says, does the RHA allow abortion up to the point of birth? And so the 3 conditions that have to be met for abortion: it is performed earlier than 24 weeks of pregnancy, in the absence of fetal viability, or 3, if necessary to protect the patient's life or health. So abortion is allowed without any restrictions during the first and second trimesters. Later than that, the question is how fetal viability and protection of the life and health of the mother are determined. And the law leaves that up to the practitioner's reasonable and good faith professional judgment based on the cases. Now, that does allow for later abortions than some people are comfortable with. And the point that he makes, the guy writing this article, remember he's pro-life, is that less than 1% of all abortions are in that late period. So we are talking a very low number.
And I would think that those would be performed then in hospital because you're in some sort of health danger.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's the point that he makes. Right. Those are not easy. Right. And what it does do that is significant, which kind of Stuart was talking a little bit about, which is that the paraprofessionals are allowed to participate in it. And we're seeing more and more of that in medical care. The physician's assistants and right. It's not always the doctor doing it. It's the other folks in his or her office that do it. So, does it really change?
Well, that gets around the oath, too.
I don't think that's the purpose. I think it's more to allow insurance, right? Because most of the insurance codes going out now are going in that direction. Because the doctor is still...
Now, it's always under the impression this is not covered by insurance. That's why they have clinics. That's why you have Planned Parenthood.
It depends. Again, if the mother's health is threatened, it can be.
Yeah, right. And then
Right.
that would be in the regular doctor's office
More
or the
likely,
hospital.
yeah, more likely. Yeah, so I don't think these are the real quickie. You're not going to pull a large fetus quickly. It's just not going to happen. Logistically, it doesn't take great science to know, right? When you have an early abortion, the fetus is anywhere from microscopic to very tiny. It doesn't achieve the big, the amount of growth. I almost brought in my human development textbook because it's got this great picture showing you the relative sizes. And a fetus
Well,
does...
there's a phenomenal, I don't know if it's still there, but years ago at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, they had from the very beginning to the very end, they had actual babies.
Okay.
And the babies were it was a very interesting display because you could see exactly the development from, and of course they were deceased babies along, but gathered for this display. And it was there for years. I don't know if
probably is.
Still,
It's still. I mean, that's an important piece. The book that I have has pictures of them, and so you go from you start out you're one cell, right, and that cell becomes 4, and then 1632, etc. It starts multiplying rapidly, and it's not even a fetus yet, right? It's you go quite a ways until you get to fetus. And you've got to go through zygote and embryo and all of those other things. And you've got to survive a lot of things. Right? More than half of pregnancies are naturally aborted. The body doesn't accept the embryo to make it a fetus. So a lot of that happens very early. And, that's your body doing it. And there's nothing to say one way or the other about it. So... it's a very complex situation, like a lot of things. There's no easy answers. There's always interesting questions. So does this really change anything? I don't know that it really does. The more I looked into it, the biggest change is perhaps allowing the other folks in the office to participate. But I can't picture that in a complex, difficult case that it's going to go to the paralegal. Not paralegal, the physician's assistant, or the paraprofessionals. So, yes, it addresses a variety of things, and as Stuart was mentioning, I'm not always thrilled when I go into the doctor's office and the only person I talk to is the assistant. It's like, where's the doctor? But the truth is that a lot of medical stuff now is not directly to the doctor's becoming more of a manager of staff. And we're just seeing that change everywhere. But the doctor is still responsible and liable and all those other good things. So the oath still carries because that professional, the paraprofessional, is operating on the professional's authority. Right? They're overseeing it even if they're not physically doing it. So I think that's an important piece on it. So I don't know that the abortion law in New York has really changed a whole lot other than removing the criminal. They did change the law to not call it abortion, or how it's exactly phrased in here, but in the event of what you were talking about, if somebody injures somebody and they lose their fetus. So we'll see where that turns out when there's a case that tests it. There weren't very many tests. There haven't been very many test cases of that question in any event. So, yeah, it's interesting questions, and life is not easy, and that's part of why, even though we have all of these wonderful words in Scripture, how we make it apply in the daily world is really the big question. There was another interesting piece that that Stuart brought up when he was talking about, can you conduct civil discourse? And that, of course, is extremely important in Scriptures, the ability to not argue. Jewishly, we give a blessing to children. We, especially the boys, we say to them, may you be like Manasseh and Ephraim, the two sons of Joseph. Why? Because they never fought. They're the only brothers who didn't fight in all of Scriptures. So the hope is that you can find a way to respectfully handle your differences. Now, we grow and we learn through conflict. And probably the thing that says the most about who and what we are is how we handle conflict and things with which we don't agree. And, when do you stake the claim that this is the principle and no, I can't cross that line? And how do you do that? Do you do that by screaming and yelling? Do you do it by civil disobedience? Do you do it in respectful conversation? And, I recently had a discussion with somebody, and here's the point. You don't speak respectfully to somebody else because they've earned it. You speak respectfully or kindly or whatever because you are that person, right? So if you, scream and yell at somebody, that's not their fault. That's your fault. You should never lose control to that level. And if you have problems with that, then, that's like a broken leg. You need to get some assistance so that you improve the toolbox, right? Improve the tools in your toolbox. Again, not because the person is, the person's a person. And at the bottom level, we are all reflections of God. And whether we agree with somebody, whether they're horribly obnoxious, terribly mean, a threat, they are still a human being. And they are entitled to certain privileges, right? So even Scripture says, right, you don't execute someone, right? If you're going to be, if you've done a capital crime, you don't execute somebody on the testimony of one. You need at least two or preferably three witnesses that can and the witnesses cannot be related, right? They can't be connected in any way. So they've got to be objective, independent witnesses to bring the argument to fact. And that's an interesting piece. It's one of the things. It's a sidebar, but I always, when I'm officiating at a wedding, part of a Jewish wedding is a ketubah contract, and you have to have two witnesses. And it's always fun when I say to people, they can't be husband and wife signing your ketubah. They can't be two brothers. They can't be father and son. No, it can't be your dad. Right? It has to be somebody not related to you and not related to each other.
Okay.
So we need independent witnesses to say, yes, this is a legal contract. So it's an interesting piece that comes in place. And we're actually expected as rabbis to investigate these witnesses that are going to sign the contract. And so I have a little discussion with them, do you understand what you're signing? Mm-hmm. Do you, et cetera.
And who are you?
And who are you? Yeah. And how are you related?
Yeah.
Or
yes.
Yeah.
How do you know them?
Yeah. How do you know them? And the best thing is I'm a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's, that's got its own biases, but obviously for a wedding, you're going to expect that they're going to be friends if they're going to sign the contract. But that's part of the game. And so here's a little window into me. And a Jewish contract requires at least two witnesses. Jewish law, or not Jewish law, Jewish tradition, it's a better way of putting it, expects those two witnesses to be male. So I like things to be more modern, more balanced, more gender equal, and so I require 4 witnesses. right? And that's my way of making it egalitarian. It's a little more difficult on the couple. They've got to come up with 4 people that aren't connected and related. But that way, absolutely, we've got a valid wedding contract.
What's in the wedding contract?
It can be a variety of things. It can be, it very often includes the terms of a divorce. Not that we expect a marriage to end in divorce, but the goal is that if the marriage ends in a divorce, that it be amicable.
So they've already agreed on how it should end if it comes to an end.
Right. And there's actually a secondary document that's often done, and that's called Tanayim or conditions. And, and I actually put in those things like if one of the partners abuses the other. And it's not always the guy who's the abusive one. It can be the woman. Or it can be a same-sex marriage. I will officiate those as well. So one partner or the other, if one of them is violent, that's a reason for a dissolution of marriage. And there's also provisions in there that the child, right, you want to make sure that the child, any future children, don't end up as being out of an impossible situation. So you want to make sure that the wedding or the marriage ends up divorced and dissolved.
But don't you think really it's kind of hard. Divorce is impossible for the children anyway.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking more about is not so much the children of that marriage as I am when one of the partners then connects with somebody else and has a child, right? If Jewishly, if you don't issue a divorce, then that next child is born out of wedlock, right? And then it becomes a problem for the child, and that's not fair. That's not fair, because that child had no control. He didn't get to sit up there and say, God, no, I'm not going to go because they're not married.
Yeah.
Right?
Please pick some different parents for me.
Pick some different parents, yeah. It doesn't work that way. So that's part of the thing, is to make sure. So one of the things that I have in there, it says that if this marriage does dissolve and we go and seek a civil divorce, then we're going to get a religious divorce too. Right? So that there's no question down the road for anybody that, and it works. You can compel the divorce that way. So, because that's important, because people get nasty sometimes when the marriage breaks down. People who otherwise would be civil and... Well,
because there's passion involved.
Yeah, well, and yeah. I guess a telling thing is a friend of mine when I worked at Goodyear as a tire engineer in a former life.
Tires. You brought up tires. My day started off with a flat tire.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry.
That's funny.
Hopefully not one that I ever had anything to do with. Mostly I didn't work on car tires anyway. I worked on light truck and big earth mover tires, bigger than me. Yeah. And airplane tires, those kinds of things. So I was in some of the unusual. I did a go-kart tire. One of my patents is on a go-kart tire.
Wow.
Of all crazy things. The mold shape of a go-kart tire. What can I say? Patents are always interesting. And so getting back to it, the gentleman that I'm talking about, for his honeymoon, he and his wife went to Ireland, which of course is Catholic state, so divorce not allowed, doesn't happen, or at least not easily. And so he said that they picked, when they were in a bar, in a pub rather, they talked to an older gentleman, and they said, had you ever pondered divorce? And the guy looked up at them and said, divorce? No, murder many times. Right? Yeah. Right. So, marriages can be very intense relationships, and you don't know, right? When you come into the wedding, and I do counseling with the couple, and obviously the hope and expectation is that what you're doing is going to last, but statistically we certainly know that not every knot you tie stays tied. People change, people grow,
and even as a society, we've become more of a throwaways. And if they make it easy for you to do this, then you do it more quickly.
Well, the other thing that we're seeing is later marriages, because people are testing out the relationship. right? So one of my rabbi friends said, it used to be that you got married and 9 months later was the baby. Now you have the baby and 9 months later is the marriage. Yeah. So, and that's an answer to divorce being difficult, right? So I don't make that commitment. And I remember one of the very first weddings that I officiated at as a rabbi. The couple had lived together for some number of years, and we were sitting there, and they said, and the guy said, "Nothing's ever going to change. We've been together for years. She's the love of my life." Blah blah. And I said, "Well, okay, let's find out. Let's just continue through the process, and we'll see." And we had done the wedding, and they were running around getting their photos, and they whisked by me on the little go-kart they were on, getting all these wonderful scenes while she was all decked out in her gown. And he had the driver stop the cart for a second and stopped and said, "You were right. It is different." And it is, right? Because what you're birthing is the couple. The marriage births the couple. Yes, you might be significant others to each other. You might be a pair, but you're not a married couple. There's not a family couple set up the same way as it is after marriage. I do believe that changes things. And so, again, when you no longer feel that family connection, then it is time to amicably break it apart. I've done more than one time where I've done marriage counseling, and sometimes they'll come into me and they'll say, "We're ready for a divorce, and you're our last vestige." And particularly,
you're our only hope.
Yeah,
Obi-Wan
you're our only
Kenobi.
hope of it working out. Yeah, you're our only hope, Obi-Wan. And in which case, I'm a rabbi, not a miracle worker. But in those cases in particular, or any time that it's a really strong disagreement, it's like, well, I don't guarantee that we're going to resolve your differences. But what I will ask you to do is to commit that if we can't resolve them, that you can amicably dissolve the relationship and hopefully stay respectful with each other. That's, I'm not invested, and I'm not going to browbeat one of you to stay with the other. We'll work it together, but it's got to be a marriage. If it can't be a marriage, then it does belong in a divorce. People do not should not suffer in the function of a marriage. And I tell people that again, that thanks, Cliff. Cliff just put on archives of the show are available on YouTube. Thank you, Cliff. And that I don't know where that went. But
dissolving the marriage,
just something about that. That people need to stay respectful when things do dissolve. That it's going to happen. Divorce has been around. Abraham and Hagar got divorced. Right? There was the old style divorce, at least in Jewish scriptures. They don't get divorced in the Quran. In the Quran, he continues to be married to Hagar and to Sarah. It's just that he sets up separate households. And interestingly, when the Mormons were in the West, they often did that they had separate households, partially because houses can only be so big. And if you've got multiple, right? The Japanese definition of war is 2 wives in 1 house. Always like that graphic.
Now, so multiple wives goes back
way back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But now, how did we get to where we believe that there's only one?
Yeah.
At a time, actually.
When did that?
Or is there supposed to be one at a time?
Well,
I mean, we see this show on TV, the Sister Wives show, where the man has multiple wives, and they do have their own houses, and he just visits this family and then visits that family.
So the realities of it, there are polyamorous relationships, and some of them work. They're not for everybody. So for some of them, they work. I'm in a monogamous relationship, have been for a long time. But
I just wonder how he pays all those mortgages.
Well, and that's a realistic issue, right?
Maybe the wives work.
Sometimes that is the case.
Send the wives out to work.
Yep. Sometimes, but still, two incomes coming into a house.
It's still hard. Yeah.
Yeah. You're still struggling unless one of them's really, really rich. It was in plural and multiple marriages, that was always the big issue, is finances. And Scripture even says if you can't take care of more than one, don't have more than one. Islamic law is much more strict. They limit it to 4, and each wife must have exactly the same things.
Okay.
So, they're very adamant about it. And there's a couple of stories of very pious people who, go and buy a watermelon and slice it in quarters and send 1 quarter to each wife, right? So that everybody has exactly. Because that's not easy to do. Very not easy to do. And not everybody, again, has the same needs. What if one wife has 5 kids and one has 2? It's a different scenario. And that's probably the more realistic challenge with multiple wives and children, which is there is a limit to the pie. There's 24 hours in a day. And if you give each kid, an hour of quality time, how many kids can you give that hour to?
What's interesting too, though, is there's never really been any wives with multiple husbands.
At least not in our culture, right? I think that there have been in other cultures.
Okay.
So it works different ways, and certainly there are women who've had other.
Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
not that it's like okay with everyone.
Well, some again, some couples are more fluid than others. I'm not going to say yay or nay, because obviously, the Jewish point of view is that you should partner up, and although, David had more than one wife, Solomon had more than one wife, Abraham had, Sarah and Hagar. Hagar was a wife, right? Sarah gives him Hagar as a wife. People often try to say, well, she was a concubine. No, that's different. And then there's concubines, right? What can I say, right? You were talking, though, Japanese culture had maybe not multiple. They had one husband and wife, but the wife actually arranged for recreational sex activities for the husband, and she frequently had a lover on the side. So it's, some cultures are more fluid than others, and somehow it's differently structured according to wherever. So yeah, it's different systems. The challenge always is how to do whatever you do in a way that it doesn't hurt others. And that's not easy. I don't know that I would like to try to juggle all of that. There's enough challenges with a good marriage, keeping it working. Because anybody who thinks that, this is just, you're always wonderful partying, it's like, no, you're human beings, and just as any two individuals who spend time together, there's friction, and then there's good times and friction and good times. And, we can argue about whether or not I'm dressed fast enough, or he's dressed fast enough, or, what you want for dinner, don't want for dinner.
Who's washing the dishes?
Well, that one's easy in my house. Never mind. But yeah, stuff like that. There can always be, and there's communication issues. That actually is the biggest result, the biggest cause rather of marital challenges that I have found, is a lack of communication, or you should be doing what I think you should without my having to tell you. It's like, no, we're not mind readers. That's not how human beings are wired. Yes, we're pretty good at reading each other, and unfortunately.
Or I'm not necessarily an extension of you.
Right.
I don't know what you're thinking.
Yeah. Don't make a dinner date for me without checking to make sure I'm okay with going out 17 times this week. Not that I ever exaggerate numbers. So, yeah, communication is probably the biggest cause of marital conflicts, or any kind of conflicts. People assume things and then act on those assumptions. And I was just telling that to somebody actually this week. When you do that, you're acting on air, and somebody's going to yank your legs out from under you because you're not standing on anything. And you're going to fall. Assumptions are very, very dangerous. You need to ask the question why. Not just, somebody said to me, well, my spouse feels this way. And it's like, okay, what are the reasons for that? Well, I don't know, I didn't ask. And I'm sorry, you really don't understand what's going on unless you find out what are the cues that are causing that. right? So if somebody doesn't like a restaurant, why don't you like the restaurants? You know, because that information is helpful, so you know what other restaurants to pick or not pick. I don't like that restaurant because it's noisy. Well, you know, or I don't like that restaurant because the waiter was rude to me, the server was rude, or I didn't like the food. Those are three very different issues, and they're going to affect dramatically how somebody's going to feel about another restaurant. So we very often operate on fractions of information and make huge decisions. That kind of gets to where we were last week when we were talking about the abortion issue.
Mm-hmm.
And, I could easily have weighed in on my own personal beliefs about something, although I tend to ask questions more than to dictate, because I find that leads to better decisions on my part and somebody else's. But I wasn't willing to do that because I just didn't know enough. And, even here, I probably read 15 or 20 articles. I'm not a lawyer, so let me tell you, I looked at the law and went, yeah, right.
It may have been the speech, too. There was a speech the mayor gave, and then there was the governor of Virginia, and it all kind of coincided at the same time. And
But it's like one of the assignments when a couple of years ago, during one of the Israel-Palestinian conflict periods, I always pick a topic of a current event for my religion class to debate and look at and try to learn some things about. And I tried to use the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it was almost impossible to find any site on either side of the argument that I felt did a half-decent job of giving facts and respect to the other. There were precious few sites, and BBC not. There just was not a whole lot of really good material that gave enough of the story, enough of the history, enough of both sides. Why not BBC? Well, because they're part of the problem, right? Some of the promises that Britain made when it was a colony are part of the reason why there's still a conflict. So enough guilt to go around for a long, long time. And the other reality, because I worked, when I was in Tucson, I worked with the son of the mayor of Hebron, a former mayor of Hebron, and the Israeli representative in town, and they and another Muslim and another Jewish person formed a panel to look at a movie called Paradise Now, which is an Israeli film, looking at the suicide bombers. And it's an interesting insight. The movie was based on an interview with somebody that the Israelis had actually captured before his belt went off, and they were able to disconnect him from his belt, and they interviewed him a couple of different times, and the results of that interview were used to create this film. And so we showed the film and then had the panel talking about it. And one of the big things that I said to the people on that panel was that I expect respectful discourse, and no, we can't roll everything back to 1947, 1948. That was 2000 something, whatever it was. And this is where we're at, and we've got to deal with the situation on the ground, what's really happening, and where do we go from where it is. How do we create a world where people can be treated like human beings on both sides? How do we diffuse it? Right? Ireland did. What's it going to take to start to diffuse some of this, and how can we do it effectively? Those are not easy answers or easy questions. Those are big things. So if anybody's got any opinions on any of that or any questions, we've certainly had a quiet show again today. 772-340-1590. I do see that some people are watching, and I see some of the Facebook little things that pop up and down when people like or don't like things. I only see likes, but
good.
That's okay.
That's good.
Yeah. What can I say? Every once in a while you get you tickle somebody's point, and that happens. And I try not to do a lot of that, but I'm also not gonna fib. I'm gonna go where it needs to go. to the best of my ability. And I'm a human being. I'm a rabbi. I'm ordained. What does that mean? What does it mean to be ordained as a rabbi? Well, part of that depends on where your ordination comes from. Assuming that your ordination comes from one of the recognized schools, then it means that you've spent a fair amount of time really studying. Your knowledge has been tested by peers. You've done extensive work. It's 5 years after college for a rabbinical ordination in any of the major schools. So the conservative, the reform, are HUC. Yeah, URJ, HUC. HUC is the seminary. The Aleph, where I went, is 5. Some people spend a lot longer than 5 years, and people usually typically come out with a master's along with it. It's, I would say, as difficult as the PhDs that I've earned. So this is a good time to segue. It's not totally a commercial, and you don't even know about this yet, but we're going to be having an art festival. So if anybody'd like to sponsor part of that, be a vendor, or learn some more about it, save the date, April, I think it's the 12th. It's the second Sunday, and that'll be at the community center. So please start to connect. I'll have forms up on the website sometime over the weekend, I was promised. We'll see if that works. And then we have our second annual expo in September. That was a nice one last year, I think. A lot of people got some good information, some good products, some good vendors came.
You said the community center, Port St. Lucie?
Yeah, Port St. Lucie, Oneroso,
Okay.
right, Oneroso. We've got the whole, that big auditorium where you do all the voting and stuff. It's the biggest, there's obviously a whole lot of other activities that happen at the community center. But yeah, we wanted a central location for both of those things. So those are two exciting things, the Treasure Coast Art Festival that we're a sponsor of, and also the Treasure Coast Expo.
So if you're an artist, you can find out about booth space,
right, exactly,
and show your work.
Show your work and hopefully sell some and be a little less starving. And, more details on that coming very shortly.
Great.
But that one's coming up. And, of course, right after that is Passover. We will be hosting, as we always do, 2 community seders, first and second night. That's the 20th and 21st of April. Lots of things happening. Purim before that, about 1 month before that, around the same time in March. I don't have the date on my hand. I guess I need to make myself a little chart and start to look for that on the Facebook page and on the web page. Those items are coming up. So it's Purim in March, the art festival, and the and Seder in April, and we've always had a wonderful dinner. Everybody loves the food, and it's a full ritual Seder, but it's short. We really boil it down to the essence of it, and I always promise people you will not die of starvation before we get to the food. Yeah, it's typically about an hour, and then we're eating. Of course, you're eating along the way before you get there. You have the appetizers. That's really what it's intended to do. Some people don't get that. We'll take a look more and more at Passover. It's kind of fun. We'll take a look at the different ritual events. And so here's my challenge to everybody. Find out anywhere in the Haggadah that the eggs are referenced, or in Scripture. They're not. I'll clue you. But go ahead and try. Prove me wrong. Yeah. How and where do eggs end up in the Seder?
And the Easter Bunny.
Yeah. How does an Easter bunny lay eggs? Yeah. How does any mammal
Magic. It's magic. That's
The
why
o-
they're colored.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, well, the only mammal that I know is the duck-billed platypus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's always an exception, right? But I don't think there's any other good reason for it. Never mind. So there are some interesting things. So the Seder and how it came to be what it is. Here's the challenge. Why is it less than 2,000 years old? Because it is. The Seder is not that old. The rabbis built it after the temple was destroyed. So we'll take a look at more of those things as we go on through the spring season with Ask a Rabbi. please do that. Please check out our services at Congregation Eitz Chayim. We are located across from Met Stadium at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. So if you're coming into West Park offices, we're in that office complex. We're in the front building right next to the elevator in the middle of that building. But we're on the first floor. And service is Friday night at 7:30. Shabbat morning, we have Stolen Moments at 9:30 and the service at 10:30. We're also putting together a meditation class. So if you're interested in that, one will be Monday afternoon for the folks who can come out on a Monday afternoon, and then Sunday late morning for the folks who need it on a weekend. So please do check with me on both of those items, meditation, chanting, twice a week, and we're adding that into the schedule. We always do stream our services on Facebook, so you're welcome to be a part of that. You're also welcome to come and actually come to the service and be part of it and enjoy some of the Oneg Shabbat and the conversation after the service. Some people say that that's part of the package is the discussion afterward, and we do go on for a while. You're welcome to partake, or as little or as much of that as you want. So those are some of the things about our congregation. We're in our 4th year. Wow, I would never have guessed that 4 years ago that I'd be sitting here on this radio show talking about planning our 4th Seder, but we're there, and growing nicely. So thanks to the Treasure Coast and the reception of what we offer, which I think is a warm and friendly service, and that's a big part of it. And we're reformed with a renewal flair. That means lots of music and lots of engagement. So that's our upcoming events, and I'm still waiting for somebody to call and ask a rabbi a question at 772-340-1590. Okay, so we've talked about that abortion law that I promised I'd talk about. We talked about the 10 Commandments a little bit. So here's another piece, right? Some people say, well, where does Judaism stand on things like birth control? And, there is the instruction, fill the earth, right? Be fruitful and multiply. And Judaism translates that and says that ideally you have a son and a daughter to replace you. And then it becomes a little more optional. Right? As long as
do you have to keep trying until you have a son and a daughter?
No, I don't think so. Yeah. I said that's an ideal.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to work it out that way. Right? And, it never does work out that way. But that everybody has a son and a daughter, right? I don't know what percentage it is, right? We're 50%, thereabouts, roughly, male and female. Not true with ants, but it's true with humans. And most mammals. Most mammals are that way. Yeah, I love that because, I've tried to explain to people, we're going to be talking about Passover, right? Part of it is a lambing festival. It's a festival of culling the herd. Why do you have to cull the herd? Well, if God was good to you and gave you 100 little girl sheep, and they're now a year old, and you now have boy sheep, well, how many boy sheep do you have? I get these, these blank, and
probably just as many.
Probably about the same number, right? Now, how many boy sheep do you need to take care of that 100 girl sheep? And make them pregnant. You don't need 100, right? So what are you going to have if you have 100 little boy sheep and girls go into rut? Right? You've got blood on your hands in all kinds of ways. Right? Trying to keep those 100 boys settled down. In the wild, they end up killing each other, and that culls the herd.
Right.
Right. But when you've domesticated them, they're not going to go that way. So, yeah, it's all those little yearling lamb chops running around. That need to be made into lamb chops.
You got to eat.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's true, right? It would be nice if we could live in a way that didn't harm the environment and didn't harm animals and didn't this and didn't that. And then you start looking at things and you realize there's a lot more connected. Like some vegetarians.
You can't have that argument with a lion. He's going to eat.
Well, of course.
And that's what he must kill to eat.
Right.
So.
Yeah, he's going to kill to eat.
Here's life.
Right. Well, the idea is that we are theoretically a little better than a lion or have more resourcefulness than a lion. Not always, but right. And, we are omnivores. We're designed to be omnivores.
Well, humans, I get, you have to think, well, we eat what we have.
Yeah.
If you are someone who lives near the ocean, you eat more fish.
Right.
You eat what you have.
And fish is very good protein.
But mountain people can't have fish.
Right. When we started moving off the shores, and right, probably life started on the shores because there is that abundant supply of food and vegetation. In fact, one of the reasons that the I Indians were so healthy and big is people studying it now say, well, it's because they lived up and down the coast in Florida. And so they had all that wonderful protein off of the sea before we put all the stuff in that makes algae. Or as much algae as that makes. And so, that's why they were able to grow and be typically 6 feet tall, big strapping, the drawings of them next to the Europeans, right? The Europeans are much shorter. People got shorter when we started farming. And lifespans got shorter. That's interesting. It's interesting that we chose to come off of the hunter-gatherer. The hunter-gatherer was bigger, healthier, and lived longer, but worked harder, or maybe not. Right? Something about the wheat changed us. The current thinking is that the natural growth of wheat in the area where cities started, it started out as harvesting, and then you had to guard it, because now that you've harvested it, right, others are going to take it. And so the cities were started as safeguards, and then if you're going to be camped and safeguarding the wheat, well, now you've got to grow more because the natural growth isn't enough to get you through the winter, and now you do need other things to balance your diet. And so farmers work a lot harder than hunter-gatherers. And
but then we also started to barter those things.
Yeah, well, that's the other side,
to make sure that everyone had something to eat.
Right, and to make things more varied, and because then we could also have nicer clothes, and we could have jewelry, and we could have pots, and we could start to move into a different kind of lifestyle, and we've done that, and now we ship and truck food all over the place. But I'll tell you, I was thinking about, you look at even a vegetarian, the bees are used to pollinate. But some vegetarians have a lot of problems with honey for that reason. There's a date honey that you can get that doesn't. But, I'm not sure how the date are pollinated. Those might be wild animals, but you're still dependent on animals. It's much more complicated. There is no easy answer, no matter what argument you're addressing.
Maybe look at the honey as a gift from nature.
It can be. Well, except that when you have a beehive, right, in order to get the honey out of it, the bees are actually tricked. Sugar water's put in to take the honey out, and so they have to work harder to nourish their young. And are we, making their lives harder with that? You might not think about that, but it's, no matter where you go, you're looking at something. And, so what's our responsibility as a caretaker? Right? That's what Scripture says. It doesn't say master as in, you get to do whatever you want and destroy the planet. It's a caretaker. It's a shepherd position. So if you're shepherd of the planet, what are the responsibilities? What should you be doing? What's the right answer along the way? What do we do where?
About everything in moderation.
And that really, it's always at the extremes that things break down. And a logical system breaks down. But when you're in the middle of the road, it works a whole lot better. There are not easy answers. And the other thing that I always like to try to remind people, and myself as well, because I'm part of the package also, which is to always operate on the assumption that there's some critical piece of information that if I knew it, it might change my opinion. And, because it's really helpful not to build yourself into this little tiny corner where you've only got one choice, and then you have limited your options. I was having a discussion with somebody today. What do you do if you think you've got an investor who'll do something, but it might not happen, and so you don't do it? Well, then you're making the answer no. Right? So if you don't do the work to check it out, you've made the answer no. You were not rejected. You did it. And that one's a hard one for people to get, that very often we influence the decisions by limiting our options. It's a big world out there, lots of big choices, and lots of new things happening that are wonderful. Yeah, there's some stuff that's out there that's horrible. How do we track that middle road that you were talking about? That's what Confucius said, right? Find the middle road, the middle way. You don't go to this extreme, you don't go to that extreme. Too much is not good, too little is not good. And as I look out at the world, there's some validity to that argument, right? Enough. May you always have enough. What a blessing, right?
Or maybe it would be better to always need a little bit.
And that might be
Leave
part
yourself
of
needing
that
something.
that might be part of enough.
Keep
right?
you humble.
Well, and just enough. Not that you sit back and forget or that you're haughty to somebody. Right? Needing might be part of enough. And, may you have enough love. May you have enough connection with people. Right? So, enough is not a bad thing. Too much. Then, my father wasn't the origin of this, but he always taught it to me. He said, there's enough in the world for everybody. There's not enough for greed. And there never will be. And, so how can we live together? How can we create a world that's not people being alike? Because I don't think God wants everybody to be alike. If God wanted everybody to be alike, there wouldn't be 500 different kinds of palm trees or 5 million shades of green. I'm looking at, I'm sitting in front of a green wall because people can project things when you use this as a camera, foreground or background rather. And it was either green screen or blue screen when I was on TV in Tucson. I'm used to sitting in front of a blank wall and something being there or not there. But how do you work with all of that? How do you create a reality where people can blossom and be what they should be? Right? We're not all one shade of green. We're many shades of green. On Facebook, there's 7 shades on this little tiny screen. And the back wall is all one, but Facebook is putting its own colors up. So, and I look over at the monitor over there that puts our recording on Facebook, and it has multiple grains on it. Yeah. So we are meant to be diverse. We're meant to be interesting, and everybody brings something special to the table. And the trick is to figure out how to get the best out of everyone. How do you get the biggest pie without denying somebody a piece of the pie? Because I think that's what the sacred scripture in every tradition's about. Everybody's got a golden rule. You'll learn that very quickly when you start looking at all the different religions and cultures.
He with the gold makes the rules?
Not that one.
No.
Although I do have that cartoon in the lecture with the Wizard of Id standing there, or not the King of Id rather, standing there with saying, what's the golden rule? I have the gold. No, that's not the right golden rule. The golden rule is don't do to somebody what you wouldn't want them to do to you, and whatever version of that we end up doing. So this has been Ask a Rabbi. Thank you so much. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, and I'll look for you next week. Please give me a call next week at Ask a Rabbi.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.